Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us here at Papier and at our roundtable Drawing is Thinking. I'm Leah Sandals, online editor at Canadian Art magazine. So to get onto the discussion, this roundtable, feel very lucky to have three great artists who I really enjoy the work of here today. There's Balint Zako, Olia Mishchenko, and Jim Holyoke. And we're just going to discuss today, I guess, some questions around their practice and how it relates to drawing. Just as an advance note, I was inspired to talk a bit about drawing based on finding the book Drawing is Thinking in a secondhand bookstore. The theme appealed to me because in my own limited experiences with drawing, I know that when I'm trying to draw, I feel like my brain is doing stuff it doesn't usually do. That's a personal observation. And more recently, scientists discovered that people who draw regularly actually have different structures in their brains than people who don't draw regularly. So I don't know how that research is going to turn out, but especially now at a time when I feel like most students in art schools who are interested in drawing are often people who do digital animation, end up doing special effects for movies. I wanted to talk to people whose art practice is really grounded in a drawing practice. So with that said, I just wanted to introduce our speakers. So Jim Holyoke on my far left. I first saw Jim's work at Papier a few years ago when you did a solo booth with Matt Shane, I think. Maybe. I saw something here. But and then at the Quebec Triennial in 2011. And you do these amazing, fantastical kind of installations that also draw in the natural world. You can see some of Jim's work at Gallery Donald Brown's booth here at the fair, where you've kind of mashed up prints of the human body with fantastical kind of creatures. Like there's a spider there, I think, that has like human hands. It's kind of freaky, but very interesting. Jim grew up in coastal BC, and his work consists of installations and bookworks exploring bridges and boundaries between perception and fantasy, deep time in the present, and humans and other animals. For example, there's the work he has here at the fair and the work he's done at Lycanthrope, which was based, I guess, on wolves. There's images from each artist, which we'll hopefully scroll through once technical difficulties get resolved there. You'll be able to take a look. Jim received his BFA from UVic and his MFA from Concordia, and he also studied with a master ink painter in China recently. He is also working on a public art installation right now at Beaudry Metro Station. So if you haven't seen a lot of his work before, you'll probably see more of it soon if you live in Montreal. That was with Matt Shane. Okay, thank you. I guess the collaborative aspect is something we can talk about too. We should talk about. All right, and he's getting ready to travel through Lapland and Iceland through a travel fellowship, after which he'll exhibit at the Drawing Center in Oslo. Is that right? Yeah. Great, so that's Jim. Olia Mishchenko. I invited Olia on the panel because I really love her very precise line drawings of what can sometimes seem like utopian environments, people building either dystopian or utopian, sometimes it's ambiguous to me. But she also does large-scale installations as well and collaborative work. She was born in the Ukraine and moved to Canada in 1997 and studied architecture and art history before becoming a practicing artist. She works primarily in drawing, ranging from miniature bookworks to large-scale wallworks. And she also works with several artist collectives on installation, sculpture, performance, and food-based projects. She teaches at OCAD in the environmental design program, so still working with design and architecture students on a regular basis and teaching them about drawing. And she's shown at the Art Gallery of Ontario, Oakville Galleries, the Koffler Gallery, and also Paul Petro Contemporary Art, which is here at the fair, and you can, I believe he has some of your drawings at the booth. Yeah, cool. We're glad to have you here. And Balint Zako is known for, I guess I characterize him sometimes as primal yet witty kinds of drawings. If you haven't seen his work here at the fair yet, which is at Catherine Mulheron's booth, he has a solo booth there. You may have seen his work in The Walrus and the New York Times Magazine, as well as films like Away From Her, in which his artwork was one of the main characters. Sorry, wrong. Oh, not Away From Her. Oh, Take This Waltz. I was getting my Sarah Polley movies mixed up. Thank you for correcting me. Take those walls. Thank you. I apologize. So it's all to say that balance work is seen in a wide sphere, which I think is really interesting. So not always in the white cube context, but in other mass media contexts as well. He was born in Budapest in 1979 to a sculptor father, István Zacko, and textile artist mother, Anna Torma. The family moved to Canada in 1989 after 2 years of living as refugees in West Germany. Balint grew up in Hamilton, Ontario, and then got a BFA in photography, of all things, from Ryerson University. And his works in mixed media, painting, drawing, photography, and sculpture have been exhibited widely in North America, Europe, and Australia. His art was also featured in Phaidon's recent book, Vitamin D2, a drawing anthology. And just again, you can see his work at Catherine Mulheron's booth here at the fair. So, all that said, now everybody knows everything about you. Let's go on to the first question. So, again, because the title of the panel is Drawing is Thinking, I was wondering, just first off, what kind of thinking each of you might do when you're drawing, and how this kind of thinking is similar or different from thinking that you don't do when you're, or thinking that you do when you're not drawing. So we have just 2 microphones, so I'll just pass these over to...
I guess I've been nominated to go first about that. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah? All right, so I think speaking about what you think about when you draw is hard, because it's not normally a verbal kind of thinking that's going on, but one is totally thinking, just as a mathematician or a musician is having thoughts when they do their work. But the things I think about, they could be anything. I fantasize, I worry, I review conversations, I think about all kinds of stuff. But I think the most interesting thing is that it shapes the way that I think. It creates a form in which that I can think about things. It's a way that I can process thoughts that are actually really hard to think about when I'm not drawing. Oftentimes I'm listening to audiobooks and things. I'm listening to stories and essays, and I think that actually occupies the verbal part of my brain, so that my nonverbal brain can do the work of drawing. So that part is the thoughts I have aren't thoughts as words. I'm thinking shape, darkness, lightness, texture, all of these things that are sensual. And a lot of times I'm just trying to describe what I'm seeing. It all depends if I'm drawing from observation or memory or imagination, different things like that. A lot of times I'm just daydreaming when I'm drawing. Yeah.
So it's that kind of, daydreaming, which is a kind of productive thinking as well. That's great. That's great insight into, does anybody have something to add to that or other perspective?
Can you hear me? I kind of agree with this kind of what happens with the brain when you draw. I used to be very frustrated with what happened when I draw, because I have so much time to think about other things when I'm drawing, because there will be moments when you're figuring out the drawing, its structure, but then when you're drawing, you're just keeping track of lines or keeping track of texture, and there's a lot of kind of much slower time when your brain is actually free to go wherever it wants, but it's also kind of busy paying attention to the drawing. So having to listen to audiobooks, I listen to a lot of crazy amounts of political radio and comedy, and recently I was making a really large series of works, and they all had to do with gardening and landscape architecture and parks. But what I was listening to was, in Ukraine, there has been, huge political problems, and I've been watching and observing the news and listening to stuff 24/7. So things I was listening to were incredibly different and heartbreaking, and I was drawing branches of trees over and over and over again. So it's really interesting. Your brain can do 2 things at the same time, and they're kind of complementary. They kind of keep you in balance, I find. And I used to be frustrated that my brain wasn't occupied enough if I wasn't listening to something, and I wasn't able to do productive thinking that way. I could think about drawing, and drawing was doing well, but other thoughts were kind of all over the place and meandering. So it's nice to have kind of sometimes something to listen to when you draw. I find that with a lot of people that would mention that.
Okay. So for me, it breaks down into several different steps of how I'm thinking about when I'm making a work. It's almost like setting up a structure that when I start, my works are small watercolors and ink drawings on paper. And I would look at old photographs and old master paintings to get just the figures, just get an idea of these are the figures I'd like, or I think this would be a good starting point for a narrative, which I don't know what it is yet, but to start off from. So I maybe make 20 of them, and so I have a stack of just figures. And then I have to think about picking out one and figuring out what the story is going to be. And that is, it's almost like writing a short story. So you have something to start you off, but then you're thinking about, well, what can I add? Or if I add this character, if I add this element, how does that change the story? And then after that, I can do the drawing leaves for 5 hours, in which case, in a way, your brain gets turned off completely. But for me, it's I can listen to anything, and it's meditative. You get lost in making marks, making repetitive marks, and thinking about formal questions. And I actually really like making mistakes, because with watercolor and ink, you can't undo it. It's not like an oil painting where you wipe it off. You put something in the wrong spot. Often it's really annoying, but then that makes for better work because you have to figure out a smart way of fixing it. So for me, it's almost like completely different compartments of thinking. One is it's like Japanese calligraphy painting. Like, you have to imagine what it's going to be before you make it. And then the other part is just making the work, and that's taking time, and it frees your mind.
So the way you experience it, as you said, is there's a conceptual part of imagining maybe a narrative you're setting up in your practice in particular, and then executing, which is a more meditative, kind of repetitive. I'm just wondering, before we move on to the next question, what your responses are to that, Jim and Olia, because I'm wondering how much of a conceptual setup there is, or how you respond to that articulation of a process.
Yeah. So usually my drawings some of them tend to be very large and very detailed, and a lot of things are going on, and kind of I draw in this way that is using, some people would know it as a cavalier perspective, some people would know it as isometric drawing, where you don't have a horizon line, and the whole white sheet can become a space, and what I draw is usually spaces. And when I start, I usually have an idea of what kind of environments I want to make and all the things I want to include in that, so I have an idea, and sometimes I would have lists, and obviously sometimes there's source imagery or things I've been thinking about. And then when I start drawing, there's no particular place I start drawing. I just start somewhere and then kind of fill it up. And as I draw, it doesn't ever turn out the way I thought it would. Like, the places are in different spots. Things like the drawings start kind of making itself, and it's really interesting. You have to keep track of what was it that you wanted to draw, and not to forget to draw it, or as you're drawing, some other things would come up and then include them. So they're half planned. They're about 50%. I kind of know what I want to draw and hope I can do this. And usually it's sort of I set up as a challenge in terms of, like, my materials are limited. It's like I don't have any color or shading or atmosphere I can include. It's all just one line weight. And I'm also drawing within very specific drawing system that has, its rules, and it also has its limitations. But then I make up objects and spaces within that, and half of it I don't know what it's going to look like when I start the drawing, and I just include and make it up. And then some decisions are very formal, like, oh, this area needs more detail or texture, or there's certainly, I want more empty space here, and just kind of, it's a compositional thing. So, of course, as I draw, I think about that too. And sometimes I get mad at myself because I forgot something, and then all of a sudden you can't put something in front of other things that are drawn already. So, some of it is keeping track of things, not getting lost in your drawing is thinking that happens also. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think also that drawing is, it can be as variable as different ways of speaking, the different ways that you would approach. Imagine the different ways you might write. And so it kind of depends on the project at hand. But I've been sort of training myself to be able to draw in as many different ways from as many different places as I can. to combine them. So sometimes it'll be more like daydreaming, free associations, and other times I've got a really specific thing that I have to do. And there's these different stages where my concentration will be really sharp and then become soft and back and forth like that.
And in terms of the ink painting that you studied, how did that process, what did you learn from that process of drawing?
Oh, well, I studied ink painting in China for a couple months, which was pretty interesting because my teacher only speaks Mandarin and I can only really speak English. So I had to learn everything from observation. So at first I was making copies and he would do demonstrations. And it actually, I think I in some ways learned more because it wasn't verbal. I had to learn how things worked from watching it happen and seeing things. And drawing is so tactile, it's so physical. But anyways, after I was making copies of his work, we would, once a week, we'd go and draw outside from observation. We'd take photos, draw from the photographs. He'd give me old books of Chinese ink paintings, and I would steal parts from them. So mixtures of observation, imagination, and memory. While I was in China, I was all alone, basically. I had no friends or anyone to talk to, so I was drawing a lot of pictures from my childhood home in BC, but in a Chinese way, with Chinese brush and ink. Yeah.
Wow, yeah, there's lots of journeying that can happen in these drawings that you guys do. I guess another thing I was curious about was each of you also works in installation or volunteer work in collage, you know, collaborative projects in addition to doing solo projects. When is it the right time for you to make a drawing as opposed to explore one of those other media that you work in?
For me, it's completely separate. So one has very little overlap with the other. Collage or photography or drawing are separate things, and the reason they're exciting is because they make you think in a different way. So when you come back to, say, drawing from photography or collage, it's starting all over. It's you approach it with a fresh mind, and I mean, aesthetically, I don't think they have that much in common. I never use collage elements in my drawings, or even visual edits that are the equivalents of collage. So it's, I mean, I love paper, and in collage, I love working with other people's materials, taking old master paintings and rearranging them in a way that looks like it could have been painted that way, but it wasn't. So making it contemporary like that, but that system of working doesn't come back to my drawing. My drawing is, with collage, it's a lot of looking through source material, like looking through mountains of Sotheby's catalogs to find the right hand because it fits the right image. With drawings, I like to surprise myself. So by the time I finish it, it's like, oh, well, I guess this is it. Like, this is the thing I made, and it has nothing to do with where I started from. So in a way, I'm reacting to myself. I'm making a mark, I'm adding a figure, and then it goes off in a direction that I don't necessarily have any control, well, not control, but preconceived notion of.
So just so I'm clear, so when you make a drawing, you don't ever base your drawing on an old master painting that you found when you were doing your collage work?
No. I mean, it's nice to be looking through source material, and then sometimes I find, and Sotheby's catalogs are fantastic because they reproduce paintings that aren't in the Louvre. So you get really odd paintings, or you get everybody's version of the Mona Lisa. So you get like 10 different Mona Lisas. So you see how different artists look at different work. But it's rare that it carries over that way.
It's interesting. So the collage process and the drawing process are very different for you conceptually.
It's entirely separate.
So, and Olia, you have given your studies in architecture, and that your drawings sometimes have an architectural quality for me in their precision and sometimes their attention to the built environment. That's just my reading. I'm not going to place that in your intention. Can you talk about either the relation of your drawings to architectural drawing, or how those kinds of drawings are different, or if you'd like to, about your installation and collaboration practice and how that allows you something different or the same from your drawing practice?
I guess I fell into drawing very naturally. I never studied it, but I just started drawing, and I started drawing a certain way that I still feel like I'm still doing the same drawing, and I haven't made it yet. Though, of course, over time it changes and becomes completely other drawings and projects. And a huge part of what I do with my time is also I work with other artists on installations, but I also teach architecture. I teach students when they're making their models and their buildings, and I teach Revit and AutoCAD drawing, which is a whole other kind of sphere and dance of moving your hand or looking at lines or being able to change or not change things. At the end, like drawing to me is I took this kind of already outdated drawing system for architecture, and what I really wanted to do with it is draw activity and tell stories, which architecture, at least at that time, wasn't doing. Like now there's way more kind of actually collage and architectural representation, or there's certain practices, like there's architects in Japan that would start putting in not just furniture but people and dogs and all kinds of things into buildings. But I think the main difference, like in doing drawings as an artist, is no one can help you really. You're kind of on your own and you have to make that drawing, like at least in my experience. And you're also not really responsible to any client or any project. The drawing is what you're making, and then when it's done, then it's kind of goes into the world, which is very different from someone working either on a collaborative installation with people or in architectural practice where it's a response, you kind of solving a problem and you have to listen to other people. And I find that drawing has a different kind of responsibility than responsibility to people when I teach or responsibility to artists that I work with. It's kind of more to myself, which is really, really nice. But it could also feel really lonely, and drawings take a long time. And I find that when I do a drawing, like I don't leave unfinished work and come back to it. I just sit down and do the whole thing and then move on to other things. So there's never really a right time to do a drawing. A drawing, when it needs to be done, you just drop everything else and do a drawing. And other things are kind of more responsive and kind of more social. Whereas drawing, I find it's kind of anti-social in the way it works for me. So, yeah.
So for you, drawing is a solo practice, whereas installation and other things, even architecture, is a much more collaborative kind of practice. It's interesting. And maybe you have something to say about that too, Jim, given your practice with Matt and in an installation.
Oh yeah, where'd he go? Yeah, that guy, Matt Shane. I've been drawing with him collaboratively for 14 years. We met in a Drawing 100 class at UVic a while ago. But we've always been doing our solo projects in parallel to that. But I guess I wanted to say that, like with my own work, I basically go back and forth between bookworks and zines and installations. And in either way, I'm looking for a kind of an immersion where I'm creating and trying to envision my own world, even if it's a collaborative, shared, but we're still self-creating this world. When I was a kid, I drew to tell stories. I had a lot of trouble learning to read and write. So I was drawing pictures on the bottoms of tables while the grown-ups were talking, and I'd always have these stories that would go with the pictures that I was making. And I think that storytelling is also a kind of a psychological immersion where you have to get lost in a story. And I just go back and forth between the two, and I think they refresh one another, to draw big and then draw small, to do something that is somewhat performative and then totally private, to work in collaboration and then go back to being alone. I guess the first collaborative installation I ever did, I wasn't even thinking I'm making an art project. I just wanted to know what it would be like to fall asleep and wake up literally inside of a drawing. And so Matt and I covered all the walls in our basement suite in Victoria with paper and drew all over the walls for a year. I think we just wanted to know what it would feel like. But then that was, it sparked an idea. So we do something like that every couple of years now. But I don't really think it's one or the other. In fact, for me, it feels best when I go back and forth.
That's interesting to me too, that it's kind of a package deal for you. It's not like I can't just focus on one or the other thing. It's like it needs to be a holistic kind of moving back and forth.
I think that I don't even think I could make collaborative installations unless I was making my solitary small drawings. All that practice is something that helps me out when I'm drawing with other people.
And I guess bookworks can be, although they're so small, if somebody's really engaged with them, they can be immersive in an imaginative way, whereas the installations can be immersive in a physical way.
Exactly, yeah.
I wish you had photos of that. Do you guys have photos of that basement apartment?
Yeah, there's a few flipping through here,
Okay.
I think. Yeah.
I'll have to keep an eye
There's a
out.
couple grungy pictures of our
Okay.
basement.
Well,
It
thank-
almost burned down 3 times. It's really a fire hazard.
It's a little bit of a fire hazard when you cover your apartment walls in paper. Um, well, thanks all of you for speaking to, I guess, some of those other aspects of your practice. I'll just move on to another question, I guess, and it relates as well. The drawing I've seen from all three of you tends to draw me into a place of imagination rather than one of life drawing, I guess. So while many students have to learn drawing in life drawing classes and learn it through representational means, artists like you are often taken in a more imaginative direction. So why is that? Like, why are you drawn to depict imaginative scenes rather than realistic ones? Do you still practice by doing life drawing or still life drawing? And I guess what is the difference in your experience between creating an imaginary narrative or through your drawing and creating a representational depiction of life?
All right, well, I'll go first then. I guess I wanted to say something about, I think that drawing can be an act of empathy. I do draw from observation a lot. I do draw, in fact, I just finished teaching 3 courses of drawing the model. And even then, I would ask my students to stand up and shift their weight from leg to leg so you can feel the gravity moving through your body, which will help you identify that when you're looking at the model and seeing whether he or she where's the pressure, where's the resistance to gravity, all of these kinds of things. If you can imagine standing that way, it's easier to make a picture of it. And in my imaginative drawings, and I love drawing cats and dogs when they'll model for me too, but I'm also usually drawing animals from my imagination or from photos. But then too, I think what I'm really wondering about is what it would be like to have a different body than this. And I think that's a way for me to reflect back on what it is to be human, to have a tongue that can wag and make words like these and hands that can hold this. We're having an animal encounter right now with each other. And then when I draw pictures of other species, I'm trying to imagine what it would be like to fly or to live in the ocean, or to just imagine a type of creature that didn't exist. And I think there's some tricky territory eventually where I don't know if I'm objectifying or subjectifying these creatures when it's probably a harmless way of collecting them at least, but yeah, I'm trying to picture it being something else or somewhere else. It's also, so I'm talking about transformation there, but also transportation, to imagine going to a different world. I do draw from observation of places too. I love to hike and sit on the edge of a cliff and draw a mountain, but or in a boat or on a bus. I'm always trying to draw what I'm seeing, but it usually mixes with imaginary stuff. It's not strictly trying to describe what I'm seeing.
I appreciate your distinction. I guess I hadn't thought about that around empathy for the subject when you're doing representational or life drawing, and that's one thing I had totally overlooked. So I appreciate that point.
Some of the body prints that I've done, like there's a couple in Donald Brown, like that's literally I'll paint my skin and print it in so that the animal is part human animal and part something else. And yeah, what would it be like to have 8 arms, for instance? Yeah.
It's a good question. Julia or Baland, would you like to speak to this?
Okay, yeah.
Uh,
Gonna say, not gonna segue well.
Doesn't have to. For me, drawing from life is looking. You're examining something by making yourself to make a successful mark or to make an accurate mark. It's not even how well that drawing turns out. It's how much attention you pay to the thing that you're drawing. So the experience in that is that you spend 45 minutes looking at this thing, and that's the value of it. And in my own work, I don't gravitate towards that. I use figure and tree and animals and all of the different things as symbols. So in a way, it's almost like a form of writing. So I need a person, and it's abstracted. It's like India miniatures, where you have recognizable language of elements, and you use them to say things rather than taking things from the world and and recording it. I mean, to do that very successfully, you do it for 30 years, and then you get to be like Rembrandt, where he just does a squiggle, and it's like the most beautiful abstract squiggle, but it's also a woman, and it's just perfect the way it is. But that's a different way of thinking, and it's a different way of communicating than what I do, which is, yeah, I mean, I love using visual structures as a language and interchanging them and seeing what kinds of things I can do. So it's almost like abstract painting, where I need shapes and forms, but then it also has to match up with the narrative. So that structure of working doesn't fit well with recording life or recording people or recording objects.
That's I appreciate you clarifying that, and it occurs to me that storytelling is something that comes out in all of your work. As Olia was saying, you started to pursue drawing because you wanted to tell stories that weren't being told in architectural drawings. But I also just want to ask you quickly, Balint, about your background in photography as well, because in some ways photography is the thing that made drawing obsolete, right? Like, is that how would you describe your development or your incorporation or interest in photography in the context of what you do now?
When I was always interested in the tactile aspect of photography. So I was making pinhole cameras with 8 holes in a circle, and building the camera, which is almost like a sculpture in itself, and then having that record an abstracted version of the world. Or I would be collaging negatives. So I would shoot a bunch of short material, whether streets from real life or reproductions from art magazines, and I would collage them with X-Acto knives, glue them together, and print them as photographs. And I use photography as source material, and it's incredibly helpful in that, where you find these vintage photographs where there's situations or forms of characters that are useful for practice. But yeah.
Thanks. Maybe Olia, did you have some time to reflect?
Yeah, I wanted to add something about this kind of idea of maybe fidelity to reality. I think actually, at least in our work, like there's a lot of drawing from actually perceiving things. Like I always look at the way buildings work or environments work, or you really should do live drawing to figure out how to draw people so that it is plausible that it is a human figure. But some of it happens. I never took live drawing, so I just kind of happily was okay with drawing people the way I draw people and feeling like that was representationally enough. And for me, it's always been a struggle because I draw with really limited kind of means. It's just one line and just white paper. It's often really an exercise. You always have to look, and it's always about perception. And then there's this thing that happens where you're kind of translating it into this kind of economical format where you're always wondering, like, am I giving enough line for people to extract then the meaning of an object or perceive a space? So it's always a play. Like I'm not doing it, it's not about fidelity of representing the way we see things, but it's a translation into this other abbreviated language of those same things being represented. So I would draw buildings that were not supposed to work, and if you build them, they would like never stand up, but they're totally plausible as a drawing. And so you kind of play, like I'm always kind of playing in that area where my task is to kind of economically make something look like it could be a space, but then also doing it with like very little means. But I think observation, it just makes you really aware of like how little control you have sometimes when you're drawing in a certain drawing system over, you only have so many options of how you can represent something or translate in front or behind or volume or something else. But then it makes you just even look at things even more. Like, what does a poplar tree really look like? But then there's a kind of a thing that you have to translate. And how do you draw that with just, one line weight and no shading? So you have to figure out kind of a successful way of solving that problem. So it's very kind of compositional and graphic, and I think all our practices are rooted in acute perception and observation of things, but not necessarily trying to reproduce exactly the way we see them through our eyes or through, say, a camera.
Yeah, yes, all your drawings are very well observed, definitely, and studied. And I just want to mention, I'm doing a time check here, that in discussing something with you before this panel, I discovered that drawings that I thought of yours that were imaginary situations were actually based on the real, like your Dawn Blanche ones, and others that I think sometimes are real or maybe imaginary. So yeah, that tension in your work is interesting. I do want to open up to questions from the audience who've been patiently waiting to perhaps ask questions. Is that okay with you guys right now? Okay. So we're opening the floor to questions. I'm not sure if there's a microphone that should be used, but nope. Okay. Um, Anybody have comments or questions about the practices of these artists and or drawing in general? So I can keep going. Yes?
Thing that you're holding, like a pen or a pencil or something. Do you think there is something special about working with the physical, tangible things like a pen or a brush or uh, a pencil or a hunk of graphite or whatever, as opposed to working on a computer with a screen thing? Or is there something that is really important about continuing to have that physical connection to materials?
I definitely do think there is. I haven't drawn a lot with the Wacom tablets and stuff. One of my students was once like, "You got to take it to the next level and draw." And it's pretty. I tried it. It was pretty fun, but it kind of felt like I was playing a video game, and I felt like I was. Drawing is about our eyes, but it's so much about having hands and about touch. I think that drawing is maybe equally tactile as it is visual. And there's something about, I mean, I realize that when you have a plastic pen and drawing on a screen, it's still tactile, but I don't know. I guess I love playing with carbon and getting the ink all over myself. I like the physicality of that a lot. That's what a big part of the pleasure for me. And I still have to use computers as a digital stage, usually when I'm documenting things, and that's all right. But I do think there's something important about taking what you see and channeling it through your hand, through a little burnt stick, this piece of carbon. It's such a simple thing. Or ink too, ink and charcoal. It's I don't know if I can put my finger on it, but the answer is yeah for me.
To me, it's probably more about kind of permanence and immediacy of drawing with kind of pen and paper. You make a mistake and it's there, and you can't fuss over it too much, which in computer drawing happens completely differently. Like if you ever kind of done very elaborate computer drawings, like I use kind of architectural drawing, which is AutoCAD, where you're drawing spaces one-to-one scale. So I can draw this glass, and I can draw this table, and I can draw this whole tent, and I can draw a city of Montreal, and it's all actually in this file, and I can zoom in and out, and I can get stuck figuring out a detail of a table and keep erasing it, and it's so easy to just kind of get stuck there and just keep finessing. So I find that with computer drawing, you actually get stuck finessing way more. And if there's any graphic designers in this audience, you can just keep correcting one letter forever. Where when you're drawing immediately on paper, you make a mistake, it's there, and you just have to walk around. So it's much more permanent and immediate, and I really love it for that.
For me, there's something really beautiful about having this warm material, which is paper, and have a mark on it made by a hand. And when you're looking at it, you know that that hand made that mark. So it's something really simple that there is no translation. There's no, it doesn't get abstracted and then reconstituted. That there's something, I mean, that's why cave paintings are so wonderful still. You see it, it's like, oh, that was 30,000 years ago. Like somebody was there, somebody did that. It's just there. And like that's it. It's very direct, and that's what I like about it.
That's a good question. Any other questions? We've got a microphone if people have other questions. I guess on that note, I guess around the issue of the digital and the analog could probably be a whole panel in itself. Or, I mean, this whole observation you have about I could create a one-to-one drawing of the entire city of Montreal, including this table, is a really interesting one, for one thing. And speaking of digital drawing, I have a friend who worked on a kind of future scenario drawing of Toronto recently, in which the CN Tower was like completely collapsed and was flooded due to global warming. And anyway, because he was working digitally, he was able to zoom in to those small details, like a flower on a balcony of a decrepit condo building, and then zoom out. And is there I know you mentioned the tablet drawing, as well as the power of doing drawings that are direct and analog. So is there ever a temptation, though, for any of you to work more digitally? Or I get the sense not, but I just want to fill you out on this.
I think if I was to do it, then it would have to be specific to that language. So if I was going to make a digital drawing, it wouldn't just be a drawing that is done with a tablet, just as a different way of making a mark, but it would be using the powers that computer processing has to do something else. And I don't know what that thing is, but I think if I was to do it, it would have to be media specific. I have to be honest to the potential of that system to do something. Just a direct transfer is not so exciting for me because it's like a bad copy of it almost, because it has so much more that it can do. Like a drawing's not an oil painting and it shouldn't pretend to be, and a computer drawing is not a pencil drawing and it shouldn't pretend to be. And I think there's a lot of potential in that.
I teach a lot and I teach children a lot. And AGO in the past, like Art Gallery of Ontario in the past maybe 3 years, they got a whole pile of iPads to use in education. And it's been kind of really interesting because the programs they would have on these iPads are just kind of digital simulators of, anything. Like you can squish out paint and it looks like squished out paint, and you can smudge it with your hand, but you're really just working like you're touching the screen. It's been both really interesting, like seeing kids use it, because all of a sudden you can take this thing into a gallery and kind of pretend you're like smudging pastels, but you're in the gallery with the artworks where you would have never been allowed to do that. So in a way, like it kind of gives really interesting aspect to what you can do with that. But for me, teaching art technique on like digitally makes no sense. And I kind of really agree with Balin. Like what I've been doing with kids and iPads is we really work with what can computer calculate for you. So, they would do a squiggle, but then we would use a program that really immediately then starts rotating it and repeating it. So all of a sudden it's like one gesture that you're making with your hand, computer can actually, replicate and do it with you 10 times, or you can, flip things around and kind of, it's an interesting thing, and I think it's growing and it's worth exploring. But, and even, something like simulating, traditional media on an iPad's been as against it as I was. It was kind of like really fun to see that all of a sudden it's like kids could be in the gallery and be like, oh yeah, I'm like mushing paint around, like the way, like they were doing, like looking at very, very textured oil paintings, and they're like, I'm kind of like trying to figure out what that was like. But they're doing it through this digital means. I had a child tell me like, oh yeah, I've done, ink calligraphy on my mom's iPad, so I've already done it. We were just about to start doing the analog thing, and she's like, yeah, I've done it already. So I don't know. We'll see what happens.
I'd never really been tempted to work super digitally, although when you describe this complete universe of where the microcosm of the table, what's happening on the table in the city, like that's such a labyrinthine idea. I actually really like that, but I think it comes to me maybe just to actually about drawing and pleasure. That I if I had to choose a studio, I'd rather be put back in the cave with a fire and some charcoal than to be locked in a hard drive all day long. That I really love the feeling of touching something that's really there. So that's probably it's a personal preference. I don't mean to disparage digital drawing either. I think it sounds fun. Maybe I would try it, but I doubt I would ever leave the other stuff behind. Yeah.
Thanks, guys. I'm going to put it out for questions again. You don't have to ask about drawing. You can ask about anything. These are the three very talented artists.
Today. Yeah, where were your interests in drawing 10 years ago in relation to today, or if you want to go 10 years future, if you have ideas that you want to work with, or
I'll answer really easy because I kind of already mentioned that it really, like with what I've been doing with drawing, it really feels like I've been doing the same drawing. It's not. If you kind of look at different bodies of work and different things I've done, it kind of like goes from very, very documentary type of drawing where I'd be drawing brutalist built university buildings in Canada. They're from 1960s, and I've been trying to draw something that actually exists to kind of inventing completely other things. But it really feels like I'm happy drawing the way I draw and seeing kind of, it feels like I haven't done the drawing I could do with this. And so it's, I think with any artist, it's, I think if I make a drawing I'm really, really happy with once in my lifetime, if that's the one thing I make, it'll be great. So I don't want to switch what I'm doing. I don't like feel like a real desire to like draw bigger or draw in different media. Like I'm actually kind of content and happy drawing the way I draw just to see where, like what will happen. But it's different for different people.
I kind of think that I draw the same as I used to, but then I look at drawings I made 10 years ago and realize I got a lot better at it, for one thing. And I'm a lot more conscious of things that I think I used to be completely unconscious of. For instance, I rode my bike down here and it was wet, so I'm looking at the road ahead of me and there's like dry spot, dry spot, dry spot. And I'm weaving my way along. I'm like, I'm drawing right now. The road is a page, the ground is a page, the sky is a page, the water is a page. All movement is drawing. And I don't think I thought of that when I was snowboarding, but 10 years ago, it's a big white page. You're literally making lines down it. And all I'm thinking is there, line, line, turn, turn. That's all that's, but now I'm just more aware of drawing being ubiquitous, something that's all around us, and something that we're always doing. And so I think I'm connecting the drawing with a pencil on paper to other ways that we move and picture things more now.
So my work 10 years ago, if you look at it compared to now, you would be able to see that it's the same artist, but it's also that it's completely different. So in a way, if you see it incrementally change, it absolutely makes sense. But if you take two works 10 years apart, then there is quite a gap in between. So there's a logical but very gradual progression. And I keep trying new things. I try to paint a little bit larger, but then things like how your arm moves when you're trying to make a line that's this big is entirely different than how your wrist moves when you're trying to make a line that's very small. And when you spend 10 years making very small lines, having to make a large line is new, and it has to be learned. So there's things to try, and you figure out what works best for you. And I'm coming back to, I've done really large things, and now I'm coming back to realizing that small is my preferred way of working. And I think it's figuring those things out come with time as well, that just knowing your materials, knowing yourself, knowing your preferences, and figuring out what works best for you over time. You just get more and more certain in which direction you're going as the more experiences you have.
Those are great observations from everything is a drawing, so we're inevitably drawing all the time, to trying, sometimes you try something out and it doesn't feel like you. Yeah. But any more flash forwarding 10 years into the future for us, or I think we're good. Thank you for that great question. So I think it's about time to wrap up here. I know people want to see lots of different works at the fair. I'll just thank you guys so much for participating in this conversation. You're all such great speakers and artists, and I feel really lucky to have had you participate. And I am going to do a shout out again. So you can see Jim Holyoke's work at Donald Brown's booth here at the fair. You can see Olia Mishchenko's work at Paul Petro's booth here at the fair. And Balint Zako's work at Catherine Mulheron's booth here at the fair. So make sure you check them all out if you haven't already. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you so much.